Hey, thanks. I'm my own cameraman, but it makes sure that the applause lasts a little bit longer if I stall that way. I did have a quick question. This benefits both Dave's organization and me. For most of you, when you found out about this event, how many people's primary source of information about this event was my Twitter or Facebook? Cool. So you guys have good reach.
Yeah. Good.
It's good to know.
And this is our biggest, this is our largest attended event so far, and like Jocelyn said, the first special event. So thanks so much for being here, Matt.
Sure.
This is a collaboration with the UU of Clearwater, which, as I said, is a Unitarian Universalist congregation over there. We're going to do more of this, so look for this. We've got next month a great event that we'll talk about as well. So we'll start with a softball question.
Okay. I don't play softball anymore because I tore my rotator cuff when I was pitching, but...
So now you just coach the team, right?
I like it, I just don't do it anymore.
So it must have been a horribly horrific and traumatic event that happened in your life to make you hate God and want to rip everyone's religious faith out of their hearts and souls when it's obvious that it's the only way we can have purpose in life, to know the difference between right and wrong, and to ensure everlasting life in heaven. Don't you think?
Yeah, I wanted a pony. And I prayed and prayed for a pony, and God said no, so screw him.
That was traumatic.
This question comes up a lot, you know, and I understand it. I mean, I spent more than 25 years as a believer, and throughout a large part of that, I was a pretty serious believer. And I understand it goes back to this no atheists in foxholes and all these other things. They just can't fathom that somebody could have possibly believed and then stopped believing. And so in order for them to rationalize this, they can't think that you have a good reason, so there must be a bad reason. And then you're asked, you know, well, what happened? You know, who did you lose? Who mistreated you? Let me apologize for what the church did. And I understand it, but it doesn't keep it from annoying the crap out of me, because first of all, you can't apologize for what somebody else did to me. I mean, I appreciate your compassion, but they're the ones that need to apologize. And second of all, nobody ever did anything. I'm an atheist because I tried my damnedest to be the best Christian I could be. I had a roommate who was an atheist, and I was in pursuit of possibly becoming a preacher, and I didn't want to get to heaven and have God say, hey, why is this guy who you love like a brother burning in hell? Why didn't you do what you were supposed to do? So I set out to figure out how to convince an atheist that he was wrong, and it backfired spectacularly. He and I never even had a conversation about this until we were driving home from work one day, and I said, I think I might be kind of agnostic, and because I was testing the waters, and he goes, oh, cool, and just kept driving.
Well, many of us, as we talked about earlier, have seen you on the show, or come to the conference and seen you at Free Flow. I think we find that you and other hosts so entertaining because you're having some of the same conversations that we have. I think it's engaging, and we feel empathy with that conversation, and we learn from it, and we laugh along with it, and sometimes it's heart-wrenching when you hear people have had serious challenges in their life, whether currently or in the past, and they share them on the show. So
That'll look good on film.
It's great for many reasons. I hope we see you on the show for a long time to come. Can you let us know if that's going to continue? Because, you know, we love you for that, I think, in big part.
So I don't have any. I've been hosting the show for 11 or 12 years. I lose track. I don't have any plans to stop anytime soon. I pretty much in my head have an internal commitment to do at least 15 years. Why do we always go for a round number? Maybe I should stop at 14 or 16 or. But I'm also working on other projects too, not just the Atheist Debates project, but I'm trying to start up a new show that is just me and some apologist or preacher having an actual conversation for about 30 minutes or so about trying to keep it focused on a specific subject, not just wandering all over the place. Because as many debates as I've done, and I like the debates, I'd do one every day if I could, there are problems with the debate format where there's a line from the West Wing that I use a lot, which is that it ends up being a joint press conference, where one side gets up and reads their statement, the other one gets up and reads their statement, and there's no interaction. And my favorite part of every debate is the cross-examination period and taking questions from the audience. Because I like to think, I like to make people think, I like to watch people think. Sometimes I mess with people's heads for my own. I do magic too, so that kind of is where that comes from. But it's those interactions where the audience gets to see who's just giving a stock answer that they have prepared or a statement. Who is actually thinking about this? And you can tell by the way people answer questions how much thought they've given to a particular issue or topic. And I really want the opportunity to have a conversation where somebody can say, hey, that's an interesting point. Let me think about that and get back to you. You can't do that in a regular debate, but on the new show, you would be able to, and then we would invite them back and talk about that subject.
Yeah, I find that when I'm speaking on subjects that I'm very familiar with, even then sometimes I have the rhetoric, standard information, and digging deeper is harder. And I think that's when you need to really challenge people, because these are the people that are looked up to from, quote unquote, the other side of the issues. And you want to challenge them, not to make them look bad, but just to get to the root of the differences of opinion and the differences in fact that are deceiving people.
Yeah.
So what are your pet peeves on the show? I think you talk about these things once in a while, but we find them entertaining. So what do you hate about some of the callers or some of the things that happen on the show?
I think my biggest pet peeve on the show are the technical issues that we've had. And I did an entire 45-minute video explaining the details of what's going on in the new studio. We moved out of the local public access studio into our own building. I spent a week working 16 hours a day getting all the video stuff set up and all the audio stuff set up, but we hadn't received our phone system yet. And we're getting emails from people, oh my gosh, do you know nothing about professionalism? Why do you have so many problems with the call? And I'm like, dude, I can't fix somebody else's internet. If they're on Skype and they don't have their headphones in, I can't fix that echo no matter how much money you give me.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people who just assumed, oh, this is their job. Well, the Atheist Community of Boston is entirely volunteer. Everybody on the show is a volunteer. These are people who are dedicating a huge chunk of their free time to produce a show and give it to the world for free. And while anybody who writes in thinking that I'm not more frustrated with the technical issues than they are is wrong. And so I've bit some people's heads off in email, like, I'm sorry that the show we've given you for free isn't up to your standards. Why don't you go start a show and let me know how easy it is? But I do want it the goal for the show is to get it to, the quality that you'd see for, like, I think Young Turks is probably my model because they're an internet-based show, but it's top quality stuff. It's almost network. And so we spent $5,000 on a full voice over IP 6-line phone system that's been running for a month or so, and apart from internet problems, the calls have been phenomenal in quality, and even that. The other thing is that people assume that it's my show and that I make decisions about it. I was president of the ACA for about 7 years. I'm not anymore. I'm not on the board. I didn't make any decisions about whether or not there would be comments allowed on YouTube or on the blog. There are a bunch of people behind the scenes, and then on the show, you've got me and Russell and Tracy and Don and Jan and Martin and who am I forgetting? Johnny I. I am lucky to be able to run around and have people say, oh, we love your show, and I have to keep reminding them it's our show, not my show. And hell, last year I traveled so much I wasn't hardly on at all. So this year I wanted to back it off so I could do more of the show and work on other things. I don't really get I get frustrated with prank callers who are obviously we have a couple of atheists who are probably, maybe, hopefully well-meaning, but they'll just call in and pretend to be a believer, because they want to have this argument. And the thing is, I can't tell what's in somebody's mind. I can't tell you if the person on the phone actually believes what they're saying or not. So I go ahead and have the conversation, even if I'm suspicious. And that conversation will last just as long as I think there's something for somebody to get out of it, and that we are, in some sense, accurately reflecting what somebody believes. When it gets too outlandish, then I'm happy to, no, you're done. Mm-hmm. By the way, you said I wasn't going to hang up on anybody. Cy tried to say that I couldn't hang up on him during our live debate, but I did.
I missed that. How did that happen?
It was, we had set it up so that the time for question and answer belonged to the person asking the question. And so I asked a question and he wasn't answering it. And so I stopped and he goes, no, let me finish. And I said, no, it's my time, you're done. And he goes, you just hung up on me. Yeah, I did. So
So I see a lot of similarities between the conversations that I have and I see other people having, and the conversations you're having on the show and other hosts are having on the show. How do you contrast the two? What can we learn from the differences between the partial anonymity, or mostly anonymity, of those conversations and people that are our friends, our family, our strangers that we meet? How can we compare and contrast the conversations, or do you feel like they're mostly the same in all aspects except for the relationship that you might have?
They can be, content-wise, they're likely to be very much the same. The difference quite often is what your personal investment is with the person you're talking to. So, my folks and I, for example, they're fundamentalist Christians. We don't talk about this at all anymore. We have in the past. And I would tend to pretty much treat my mom with kid gloves. Until one night, after we had agreed not to talk about it, she sent me an email. It was from a mother's love, and it was this big, long, Jesus is real, your mother wouldn't lie to you, here's this. And I was frustrated, and so I decided I'm going to reply to this email as if it were anybody else. And so I went through it line by line, just ripping it to shreds. That's a fallacy, that's immoral, that's a fallacy, that's immoral, this is why I can't stand your religion, blah, blah, just boom, 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 boom. And I spent probably 2 hours writing up this reply, and I hit send, didn't proofread or nothing. Because I was afraid if I started proofreading that I would soften something. And I sat there and I went, holy shit, I just killed my relationship with my mother.
Right.
And what I got back was, oh, honey, you're just like me. I had all those same problems, but Jesus made it all better. And then something not so funny happened, and that is my dad found out that she had this email exchange after we had agreed not to talk about it, and he forbid her to ever speak to me about this subject again. Now, if I didn't already despise their religion before, the fact that my dad can forbid my mom to talk to me about anything would make me despise that religion, their version of it. So the conversations that we have, yes, your personal investment with people is going to change how you treat them. I think probably the best bit of advice is maybe, on occasion, if you're having this conversation with a friend or a stranger that you don't have a great investment in, maybe at least for a little while, act like they're your mom. Act like they're somebody you do know. And it may change how they're going to view you in this conversation. The facts of the conversation haven't changed. I've been hosting the show for a dozen years almost, and there's not any new arguments. There's new versions of old arguments. And so you watch those conversations, and the reason I do a show in the first place, instead of just having the one-on-ones, is because I'm not necessarily trying to convince the person I'm on the phone with. Because I think that's unlikely in most cases. Because we know that as soon as somebody's made a public profession of something, they're less likely to change their mind. But what I also know is that everybody sitting out there watching who has the same beliefs as the person I'm talking to gets to feel all of the potential embarrassment of having their side represented poorly without having the personal embarrassment of it actually happening to them. And that gives them the opportunity to say, wow, if I was in that conversation with Matt or Tracy or whoever, what would I have said differently? And like I said, when I was trying to find a way to convince my roommate and it backfired, and I was talking to Neil earlier about the value of the Socratic method, about getting people to lead themselves to a realization rather than just, you're wrong and here's why and here's the facts. Those kinds of conversations are, from my experience, the most productive. And yes, I've called people names and I've hung up on them, but my goal on the show is to try to make sure that people get as good as they give. And so if they're calling in just to preach, no, you're done. There's a million shows that preach, and you can go make your own preach show. This is our show, and we're not going to just sit here and give you a podium to preach. But if they're actually interested in a conversation, that's why you call into a radio show, you're going to get 30 seconds. You're going to get a minute, 2 minutes, maybe 3 if the host really likes you. I think the average call on our show probably closes in at 8 or 9 minutes, and that's including instant hang-ups. And there are occasions where I've had entire 45-minute discussions with a single caller And that's the hard part about the show, is figuring out how long is too long for a call to go on. And the chat room evidently was desperate for me to hang up on somebody last week. And so I just, in the middle of the show, pointed out that I don't give a rat's ass what the people in the chat room think.
Gave him another minute.
Yeah, so I gave him another minute. But the interactions that we have in person, content-wise, aren't very different. People believe for a lot of different reasons, and so they're going to find their way out for a lot of different, based on a lot of different arguments and explanations. Some of them are going to be more emotional than rational. There's no silver bullet argument that I'm aware of that's going to fix irrationality everywhere. And I think the best thing to think of when you're having these conversations, whether they're in front of a big audience, whether they're on a live TV show, or with people that you care about and know, is what is my goal? Why am I having this conversation? Am I trying to change their mind, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, provided you're also willing to have your own mind changed, because we could be wrong. And that's why I ask people, tell me what you believe and why, and go through this Socratic method, because that either gets them to lead themselves towards a realization, or it allows them to convince me and change my mind. And my mind's changed on a lot of things. So knowing what your goal is in the conversation, if you're just there to show off how smart you are and how dumb you think they are, you might have it exactly backwards.
That's a good point. And the effort involved in having a conversation using the Socratic method, dedicating the time it takes to understand their arguments and where they might be further wrong than on the face of the point that they made, is a lot more involved than just saying, no, here's why you're wrong, and here's what I think. It takes a lot less time. So, like you said, if the end goal is to change your mind or get closer to the truth for the both of you, then invest in that conversation as opposed to just pouring facts and statistics into it and calling it done.
Yeah, a side example that came up this week or a week or two ago that I didn't actually have the conversation other than having it in my mind. I met somebody who thinks that Obama is a secret Muslim. Now, I could have just presented facts. For his entire adult life, he's presented himself as a Christian. He's gone to this church and studied under this pastor, and he's taken this action, and he's constantly represented it. And you can't read his mind, so you just pretty much got to take him at his word. I know there are plenty of atheists who think that Obama is a secret atheist. This argument also works for them as well. But instead, much better is to say, okay, let's assume for a second that he is a secret Muslim or a secret atheist. Why is his term almost completely up? And he hasn't done anything to forward that cause and has continually represented himself this way. Well, and if he was a secret Muslim or a secret atheist, so what? Muslims and atheists, secret or not, are allowed to be president.
So something that I find myself discussing, even with people in this room, is atheism versus agnosticism, as if they were on the same spectrum. Can you go through that for those of the folks here who haven't heard your take on it, in a take that I agree with wholeheartedly?
Sure. Theism and atheism address belief, what you believe to be the case. Gnosticism and agnosticism address what you know, or what you claim to know, or what you think is knowable. And those two things aren't in conflict, because knowledge is a subset of belief. Here's all the things I believe, and there's some subset of things inside of there that I know or think I know. So you could believe there's a God but not claim to know it, be an agnostic theist. You could believe there's a God and claim to know it, a Gnostic theist. You could not believe there's a God, and that's atheism. And then you could claim that there is no God, which that's either strong atheism, hard atheism, or anti-theism, depending on who you're talking to. At the end of the day, I'm not that concerned with the labels. But with belief being the superset and knowledge being a subset, being an agnostic and being an atheist aren't in conflict. You could be an agnostic atheist. Most atheists I've met are probably agnostic atheists. And a lot of it depends on how you define knowledge. Because if your definition of knowledge is justified true belief, well, that's one thing. I have a definition of knowledge that I think is more practical to the way we mean it when we talk about what we know. And knowledge is an expression of a confidence level. You believe something so very, very, very strongly and feel that it's so well supported that you claim that you know it. So when somebody tells me that they're Gnostic or agnostic, first of all, I don't think they've answered the question of whether or not you believe. And second of all, I don't care about whether or not you claim to know it, because we don't wait until we know something to act. You act in accordance with your beliefs. You might just barely believe something, but that's the direction you're going to act. So the confidence level that you have in something doesn't tell us anything about the thing or the evidence for the thing. It just tells us about you and how confident you are. And while that, you may be incredibly dangerous or exuberant if you're incredibly confident about something, I primarily care, do you believe that it's likely true? And so there is another form of agnosticism that's more egg-headed scholarly that I think begins by misdefining atheism. To say theism is I believe there is a God, and atheism is I believe there are no gods, which is I think a subset. It doesn't matter. We could call it non-theism with atheism. This is why there's so much confusion about this. There's a section of intellectually elite agnostics who think, this question of the existence of God is unknowable, and therefore the only rational position is agnosticism. Well, my first question is, how did you determine that it was unknowable? I might agree with you that it's unknown, but I don't know whether or not it's unknowable. So I don't know how you reach that. But the second issue is, you either believe that a God exists or you don't. Those are direct logical contradictions. There's no middle ground between I believe and I do not believe for anything, God or otherwise. There is a middle ground between I believe this is true and I believe this is false. But I believe this is true and I don't believe this is true. I use the jury example quite often. Basically, God is on trial and the accusation is that he exists. And you can find him guilty of existing or not guilty of existing. But if you find him not guilty, that just means you're not convinced of guilt. It doesn't mean that you're convinced that he's innocent. It doesn't mean you're necessarily convinced that he does not exist. And hopefully that's clearer than mud on that.
Now, can you do that in 140 characters or less?
Yeah. 140 characters for Twitter? No.
Okay. So bumper stickers don't often communicate as well as we'd like them to do.
Well, that's the thing is, a lot of times in discussions in the community, we lose a lot of nuance. And also there's a lot of hard philosophy, deep concepts with subtle distinctions between definitions that get argued about and used and misused in different places. I'm interested in that stuff, but I'm not a slave to that stuff, which is why I might be an agnostic atheist or a Gnostic anti-theist, depending on what your definition of knowledge is. And I'd rather not get hung up on the labels. It's not, by the way, that's another kind of pet peeve of mine, when somebody says, oh, this is just a semantic argument. Mm-hmm. Semantics are about meaning, and meaning is important. Now, you could say this is just an argument about correct verbiage, in which case I'm going to agree with you. Let's throw out all the labels. Let's make up a whole new label for whatever it is that you believe and talk about whether or not we have good reason for that label.
Yeah, cutting through the labels is often very helpful. I like to say we can argue all day, but if we were to disagree on how we define things, we have a lot less that we disagree about.
Well, that's the other thing is, quite often you're going to have to define terms when you're having a discussion. And if you're in an argument with somebody, and I get asked this quite a bit, how do you deal with somebody who, after you've had this argument, just doesn't seem to want to accept reason? They're happy to commit fallacies and not care about whether or not arguments are fallacies. And you've gone through all this and you're just going round and round in circles about some particular, let's say, doctrine within their belief. And while I don't have the answer to everything, the best thing I've found is set the entire subject matter that you're talking about aside, and then either speak about the foundations of reason in an abstract sense. How do we go about figuring out whether or not we should believe something? Or come up with an analogy. Hey, why do you accept your religion, yet you reject all the others, when the arguments that you're giving me for yours are the same ones, in many cases, that they're giving me for theirs? And so now they have to acknowledge that there's probably some special pleading going on behalf of the religion they prefer, or they actually have to give the evidence for it. But if the religion is getting in the way, if the discussion about vaccines or the age of the earth or who is a secret Muslim is getting in the way, you can set all that aside and say, well, let's talk about somebody has presented a claim, and it doesn't matter what the claim is. What's the process that we go through to figure out whether or not we should believe this? And actually the last video I released, or one of the last videos I released for the Atheist Debates Project, is called Thinking About Fallacies. And in that one I kind of go through what I think happens in my mind and other people's minds, and what the ideals might be for how to evaluate things. So there's some information there.
So you hit on something that I wanted to get to, but let's go there now. So people seemingly have a hard time figuring out fallacies, and I don't think we need to everybody have to be able to define what the fallacies are to know when they're making a mistake. How much do you attribute that to the education system? How much do you attribute to most people being raised in a religion, whether fundamentally or very liberally?
I don't think religion's involved in this. This is just general problems with how we think. We live our lives primarily by inference and induction. Today's like yesterday or the day before. What worked for me yesterday is probably going to work for me. And we live in a probabilistic universe. And so we get pretty good at figuring out what's likely to be true. And we get so good at it that we don't realize how bad we might actually be at it. And when we start to have, I guess, the conversations, for lack of a better word, we need to recognize that we're probably coming in with some baggage and some presuppositions. They may or may not be correct. And I've completely lost track of what you actually just asked.
I was so wrapped up in what you said, I did too.
I know you're never supposed to actually say that. You're supposed to just keep BSing, but I value people's time.
You're not in politics, so I appreciate you staying on message. So it was education.
Wall. I want a wall.
So.
Sorry.
I was late to that one.
Question too?
No. I'm just trying to insert it here into the jokes, but that's good. Keep them coming. It was religion or education attributing to, and you made a good point.
To fallacies in thinking.
Yeah.
Yes. So, first of all, one of the things I pointed out in that last video, you don't actually have to know the fallacies by name, and it's often a good idea, even if you do, not to cite them by name, because the person you're talking to may not have any idea what you're saying. And my wife actually used to beat this into my head every time I'd say argument from ignorance, which is a fallacy. And she would say, you do realize that almost everybody in the audience has no idea what you mean by that fallacy, and they think you just called them stupid. And I went, wow. Yeah, I don't know why that I didn't realize that before. You have to actually put in the work and study logical arguments, syllogisms, fallacies, structural fallacies that affect validity, and then non-structural fallacies that affect soundness, bad premises and things like that. But it's more than just the logical fallacies. It's good to go through and learn about con artists, scams, propaganda, because these are all going to involve logical fallacies at some point, bandwagon, whatever else. Get familiar with them, and then try to spot them, and in particular start by trying to spot them in your own arguments and in the positions that. So I most strongly object to bad arguments when they're being used to defend positions that I hold. The theists can have all the bad arguments, and then it's really easy to keep pointing this out. When atheists bring up bad arguments, I tend to just, like a shark, no, it's really bad. And so some of the videos that I've actually done with the Atheist Debates Project have been about, hey, the Bible doesn't actually say that, or, not every contradiction you find. But while it takes time and you have to care to figure out how to spot fallacies, and there's a lot of practice there, you don't have to know everything at the beginning to have a conversation, because you don't owe anybody an explanation for anything, and you don't owe anybody a full-on argument unless you've agreed to a public debate. And if you've agreed to a public debate and you're not ready for it, well, hopefully you will be next time, because that's going to be a trial by fire. It just takes practice, and the first thing we have to do is actually change the education system so that we're teaching critical thinking, skepticism, logic, and fallacies, all the elements of reasoning that everybody uses and thinks they get right when we all get it wrong, from as early as we reasonably can.
Yeah, and the feeling that I have, complete supposition, is that there's resistance to this because of deference to authority, which is what we tend to want kids to have. In particular, the ideologies that we can't defend very well as adults for our kids, and certainly not with other adults. I think there may be some reasoning behind not wanting to teach people to question authority. But, you know, again, that's supposition on my part.
There could be an element of that. And now we're getting into the motivations behind why it hasn't happened, and generally I tend to err on the side of laziness and incompetence, more than conspiracy to prevent people from thinking. You'll hear all the time, there's some secret mechanism that wants to keep us all dumb, and that may be the case. Fortunately, we keep on having some progress despite that. I just think that our education system, we're so big that the types of changes we probably should be making just either can't get the backing or the funding to start making those kinds of changes. And if we can't do it in the public schools for public school students, then there are those of us in the private sector who are just going to let's just keep pumping as much information out. The internet is where religions come to die. It's also where assholes come to anonymously attack people. And it's also where people come and learn by accident the same as they do in video games. There are plenty of things that you learn just surfing around that you would have never known. You'd have never gone to take a course about this, but dang it, there was a kitten in the video, and it led you to a new understanding of physics, you know.
Yeah. You have to share that link with me. So I enjoy engaging people who often cite the phrase, I don't care what people believe as long as it doesn't affect me in my life. And I've learned, I think, from you that there's a big concern there. So I'll let you say what your position is on the pushback for theists and atheists and others and everybody about how we don't live in a vacuum and why those beliefs matter.
Yeah, that was my answer.
Oh, all
no,
right.
But I'll give it another 30 seconds. I do care what people believe, some people are shocked. But why do you care so much what people believe? Because I have to share a planet with them, and their beliefs inform their actions, and their actions have consequences on them and everybody else. Now, that doesn't mean that every belief, or even every belief system, is equally dangerous. But here's the thing. Your brain also isn't a vacuum. If you reached an incorrect conclusion, no matter how specifically harmless that individual conclusion may be, that conclusion still might affect other decisions that you make. Because the processes in your brain that allowed you to reach this wrong conclusion are going to be used in other areas to reach other wrong conclusions. So I'm baffled at people who don't want to encourage as close to perfect rational thinking as we can possibly get. We're never going to get there. Not until we're all like in a computer, I guess. But when people say, oh, you know, I don't care what people believe, well, you're saying that kind of in the same context that we might say, I don't care what you do in your bedroom. And I don't care what you do in your bedroom, provided it's between consenting adults. I do care what you do in your bedroom if it's waking up the neighbors, if there are, well, I don't want to, if there are things going on that affect other people or that aren't consensual or stuff, all of a sudden it matters. The same thing's true with beliefs. Am I absolutely hell-bent on finding every single individual and finding every belief they have that I think is wrong and changing their mind? No. I want to have the conversations that allow other people and me to change our minds. I want the most reasonable beliefs to kind of bubble to the top. And I'd like to encourage the sort of thinking that makes it so that if we do have bad processes that lead to some wrong belief, that we can expose them and correct that. Hey, I've got a lucky pair of socks. Oh, why are you worried about somebody's lucky pair of socks? That doesn't affect you. Yeah, but if they'll believe that, what else will they believe?
Right.
I have no good reason to think that any individual thought or the process that led to it lives in some isolated little package in the brain and can't affect anything else. And the same thing is true when we get out of the brain to all of us. Things I do affect other people. I mean, that is also part of the foundations of morality, which I would imagine is probably a question in there somewhere, is empathy and the realization that my actions have an impact on me and on other people, and the same is true elsewhere. I think morality is a lot simpler than people have made it, but if we get to morality, we will, and if not, no.
Well, now we have to, or I'll look really dumb.
No.
I want to make sure we hit the stuff that you want to hit, and let's, before we can move on to that, so why do you think, and you touched on this a little bit, so let's go a little deeper, why is it hard to remove the, the foundations or the underpinnings of people's bad beliefs, whether they're invested in it or not? It seems like it's difficult to take those things and change people's minds, and I think there's probably a lot of reasons, but what do you attribute that to, at least initially?
I'd love to just chalk it up to human nature and be done with it, but that hasn't offered an explanation, and I'm not sure there is one. I think that everybody would recognize none of us are perfect thinkers, and all you need is one error or one hole for errors to get in, and it cascades from there. And sometimes we don't engage in conversations because it appears rude. And I get that. There's a social cost to telling someone that you don't believe what they believe. Because when somebody says to you, I don't believe what you believe, the general reaction is they think I'm lying, or they think I'm stupid. Nobody likes to feel like that. And because we can generally empathize with others, we know that that's how people react. We know that that's how we're going to react in some cases. And so it's much easier to avoid appearing rude and getting in the conversation. And the silence sometimes gets viewed as agreement, and that causes the bad beliefs to be encouraged, I guess. I was saying before we walked in here, I volunteer at a dog clinic, and when I got there, they opened the doors at 11. It was like 11:03 when I walked up, and there were 15, 20 people standing outside the doors waiting for them to unlock it. And the first thing that went through my mind is, has anybody actually tried the door yet? And nobody had, and it was open. And now that's not I thought of the thing nobody else did, because I stood there for a minute going, man, they should be open now. Surely somebody's tried the door. And I'm thinking, this is what everybody else thought. And they're all just going to stand there because they're all assuming that somebody's checked the door and nobody had. So, check the door.
Yeah, good point. So we can touch on morality with this next question. It was recently pointed out to me that religious morality has been stable for over 3,800 years, and secular morality seems to be changing. And this was a very poorly crafted argument, which is easy to discuss, and I think you'll handle it well. And I want you to touch on morality of biblical morality, religious morality. But how do you contrast religious morality and secular morality, and the tendency for both to change?
So, if your moral code is a book, and the book hasn't changed, then the morals haven't changed. And so the fact that people who hold up the Bible as their moral guide no longer think slavery is moral means they've changed, and perhaps their religion has changed as well, but it's departed from what the book actually says. The problem is, I think everybody pretty much gets their morality in exactly the same way, but I don't think they all treat it the same way after it's been sort of received. I don't have kids, so it could be that I'm wrong. But the people I know who have kids, and I've watched kids, they're not born understanding right and wrong. They don't have this intrinsic understanding of this behavior is right and this is wrong. We teach kids this. Now, they are equipped generally with empathy. And so one of the most common things, I've seen parents do is, well, how would you feel if somebody did this to you? That's awesome. That's the best thing you can do. That's Socratic methods, gauging empathy. And the example I've used before is, if you're out at dinner and there's two kids and they're misbehaving terribly, and their parents take them home, And with one kid, they say, okay, next time we're out at dinner, you're going to behave, and if you don't, you're going to get some punishment, and if you do, you're going to get a dessert. And the other kid, they sit down and they explain how their behavior is affecting other people. How would you feel if you were in this situation? What kind of things do you think we could do to change that? And how would you react if somebody was doing what you were doing? And now you take them back to the restaurant. Both of those kids behave. Which one's more moral? Which one's actually has an understanding of morality such that when the parents are removed from the equation, are they both still going to behave? Not based on a carrot and a stick. Now, it may be that the carrot and a stick is a motivation to get them to begin to empathize and understand. The prime difference between religious moral systems and secular moral systems is that religious moral systems aren't systems. They don't teach you the how of anything. There's nothing in the Bible that's going to teach you how to evaluate a new moral quandary that we come across. All it has are edicts. Thou shalt not commit adultery or sin or kill people and blah, 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 blah. And they're simplistic. And so with secular moral systems, the goal is all about getting better at getting better. The goal of a secular moral system is to say, okay, we can begin with a handful of simple premises like, hey, staying alive is better than dying, generally speaking. Being healthy and happy is generally better than being unhealthy and unhappy. That's it. You could actually start with the opposite foundations, by the way. You could start with the idea that, hey, being dead is generally better than being alive. And we'd find out pretty quickly that's not in our best interest. So you can test even these foundational things. From there, you build up. And it allows you to begin to say, okay, you get to use things like the veil of ignorance. Design the system that you want to live in, not knowing who you're going to be in that system. That's how it's like, you're doing the cake cutting experiment. You get to cut the cake into 5 pieces, but you get last pick of which piece. Your odds are you're going to get a much more fair cutting of the cake than if you gave them first choice of which piece. And so the same sort of thing, these little thought experiments, we've all heard, think globally, act locally. I tend to, when I'm trying to evaluate the moral value of something, first thing I ask is, what would the world be like if everybody took the action I'm about to take? That doesn't always mean that I shouldn't take it, but it's a good starting place. What's the starting place for religious morality, generally speaking? Now, I hate to put all religions or even all Christianity in one bucket, because there are a number of different views on this. Certainly there are religions that do a better job of kind of teaching the how behind morality. But I say keep the good wherever you find it and get rid of the bad. And if there's something good in religion, cool. But it's not good because the religion's true. Right. It's good despite the fact that it is included in a religion that is full of a bunch of false things or immoral teachings.
Right, that lines up with, it's not the person making the argument or the authority to which they bring to the table, It's the argument itself.
Yeah, and by the way, I might be wrong about everything I'm going to say today, and that's up to you guys to figure out whether or not you agree or whether you should agree. What I'm saying, the value of anything I say is in the content, not in the fact that I said it, or the fact that anybody said it. I did an episode of the Atheist Experience in drag, in part because we raised a whole bunch of money to send kids to Camp Quest, and I said, well, if my team wins, I'll do the show in drag. But I actually already wanted to do the show in drag, and I went all out. I shaved and manicured, wigged and makeup, and put on a dress.
You looked hot.
Thank you. But the whole point of it, I wanted to sit there in drag and do the show just as normal. I didn't put on any sort of fake voice or affectation. I wasn't making a statement about cross-dressing or trans or anything else. The entire point was the content of what I'm saying is what matters. It doesn't matter what clothing I have on, what makeup I have on, what sort of freaky business I might be getting up to in my spare time. What I've said is either right or wrong or neither, independent of who I am or what I'm wearing. And I love doing the show that way. I do it more often, except that my wife doesn't want me to shave my beard.
That would look good.
That looks weird.
That would look good. Let's try that. Let's do
All
that.
right. Well, I'm going to dye, so I dyed it pink once when we raised money for Camp Quest. Maybe I'll pick a new color and dye it that way, and who knows.
So this next question comes from Chase Hansel over in the Brevard area, Brevard Atheist Meetup and the Space Coast Free Thought Association. He was interested in your thoughts about the free thought community. So I'll move this into wherever you want to go. But tell us your thoughts on how there's not one free thought community. Kind of what can we learn as members of that community from someone who's done some organizing and met lots and lots of people and talked about this issue. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned, I was president of the ACA for 7 years, and my job as president was to enable people to do things. Anybody who had an idea, let's do it, provided you're willing to steer that committee. If you just come in with ideas that you want to dump on a handful of volunteers, you want us to do something, but you don't want to invest anything in it, that might not get done unless you can get one of us excited about it. The groups need to be whatever the members need it to be. It's fine to have a skeptics in the pub, we're just going to go out and drink and talk stuff. It is also fine to have an organization that is focused more on charitable efforts. Atheists helping the homeless. It's fine to have groups that are focused more on political activism. And it's fine to have groups that do all of those things. You just need to find out what your group wants to do. And by the way, if there are people who are showing up and not coming back, you might want to find out why they didn't come back. Because they may be looking for a group that's doing something that you're perfectly willing to do, provided there are people to do it. I gave a talk recently about how there really is no atheist community, no secular community, because we're not a hive mind. Because among atheists, the only thing we're guaranteed to agree on, hopefully, is that we don't believe in a God. Believe it or not, I had somebody try to claim they were an atheist who believed in God.
They're atheisting wrong.
Yeah. It's not, I'm always cautious about making the no true Scotsman fallacy because, for example, I know of an individual who I've called for them to resign, who said that the people who go to Sunday Assembly or Oasis or these things, they're not real secularists. And I was like, you're welcome to have that opinion, but if you're a significant representative of the community in a position where you're telling these people who want to go to a Sunday Assembly or Oasis that they're not true secularists, not only have you committed the no true Scotsman fallacy, but you're also a jackass. Because it's fine that it's not for you. It's not for me. I don't go to Oasis or Sunday Assembly on a regular basis. I go there and speak on occasion. I don't have that same interest in what goes on, but I know there are people who do. I have friends who fit into that, and I absolutely, completely support this. And I will go head to head with anybody who tries to say that, well, they're doing secularism wrong. No, they're not. What's happened is religions have co-opted the aspects of who we are as human beings, and they've done a really good job of building communities and infrastructures where if I was still a Southern Baptist, I could pack up and move everywhere, and there's a church ready for me that would have dinner on the table before I've even unpacked a box. And we don't do that. Or at least some of us don't. Well, the churches hold the market on charitable actions. No, you don't. You've just had an incredibly unfair advantage in having your tax-free, glorified, privileged, de facto superstar status for so long that the rest of us who are now trying to say, hello, we're here too, and we're decent people, and we'd like to do stuff too. We're trying to get some of the scraps that you've been clamoring and hanging on to as you build these monumental temples that would be better served as homeless shelters than for what they're used most of the time. So getting over the idea that I'm all about community, Atheist Community Boston, I wanted to focus on that word. Let's do the things that support our community, support secularism in our community, support church-state separation. It's weird though, the years that I've been in here, in the community, we never got any pushback when we did an atheist blood drive. Hey, we're going to donate blood. No pushback from anybody. Hey, we're going to give food to the homeless. No pushback from anybody. There's nothing about secularism that requires those things. Hell, you can be an atheist and not even support church-state separation. Look at like S.E. Cupp and other people who are atheists who don't like church-state separation. There's nothing about not believing in God means that you don't think that the religion and government should be one. Never got any pushback on that. It wasn't until some organizations started saying, hey, we could be a little bit more. We're more than just atheists. And there are secular people. Maybe we should take a position on trans issues or gay rights or abortion or any sort of social justice issue. And as soon as that came out, there was pushback. Oh, that's mission creep. You're expanding the mission. No. You can have whatever kind of secular organization you want with as narrow a focus as you want. You can have a secular organization that is just, we're going to stand out once a year and picket on the National Day of Reason. And you can have an organization that's just that, you spend your whole year planning it, and that's fine, and I'll applaud you every single day. Well, I'll applaud you more on the day that you're actually out there. And you can have an organization that does 2 or 3 things, or 3 or 4 things, or 5 things, or whatever your group needs, because we're people. Oh, well, I'm not a humanist. Okay. Can you try to be a decent person anyway? I'm not saying you have to agree with and adopt the Humanist Manifesto, but hey, we're going to go take some food to some homeless people. We're going to go challenge this bill that is, being unfair to the trans people. We're going to tell the Unitarian Universalists that while we've been a part of their community for years, we're not very pleased that they've jumped back in bed with the Boy Scouts, who are bigots.
The organization itself, not the Scouts.
The organization, the UU shunned the Boy Scouts for years, in part because of their anti-gay stance. The Boy Scouts have backed off of their anti-gay stance a little bit, but they're still very anti-atheist. You can't be a Scout or a Scout leader without a profession of faith. And so the UU church has just kind of announced that they were jumping back in to support the Boy Scouts. And there are a number of former UU atheists and agnostics and secularists who are pretty ticked about it. I know none of them are here to actually hear me rant, but it was fun.
Well, and I think that different congregations and societies and organizations will disagree, as do the different chapters of Boy Scouts on those tenets.
We actually talked about this at dinner last night. That is kind of amusing to me. You get 1,000 denominations that all identify as Christian because they're disagreeing over some point of doctrine or another. And then you've got the UU churches, which are we want to be everything to everybody, let's not offend anybody, you can come here no matter what you believe. And now there's a division in the UU churches over what they should or shouldn't be. So when we talk about, and I hear a lot about divisions in the atheist community or the secular community, yes, it's frustrating. It's also a good thing because it's a growing pain. Once upon a time, there were a whole bunch of just nothing but old white guys, and that was atheism in America. And now we're more than that, and we're growing. The none's the fastest growing religious identity, N-O-N-E, nuns. And with that means that there's a lot of people who say, hey, what about my other issues? I don't have a church to reach out to. I don't have a community that's doing this. And by the way, I think this issue is tied to religious privilege and bigotry. And if you can make that case to an organization that supports church-state separation, that is standing in opposition to the de facto religious privilege, then good for you. In your organization, you can have an atheist organization that barely ever talks about whether or not we believe in a God. And you're still a secularist. So there's lots of different possible avenues that we can walk down to make changes in different ways, and recognizing that people are more than just the one issue of the God belief, I think is important. And I have no problem at all. I'm on the board of directors for American Atheists. They're pretty focused. They don't tend to branch out into social justice issues very often. They're pretty focused on church separation. Same as Freedom for Religion Foundation. I support both those organizations. I don't know what the hell you asked, but that was a long answer to it.
If it's good enough, it'll be clipped and it'll be shared around the world in just a few weeks. So, But no, thank you for that. It was about the free thought community, and I use that term because that's kind of what we throw around locally, and it's very diverse here. Jocelyn mentioned several of the groups that helped us promote this event and continue to support, and there's pollination of different groups happening across all the local groups. There's really no exclusionary groups, other than an occasional group that's focused squarely on a specific issue, and there's a benefit from keeping that tight. And Mothers Beyond Belief, those types of groups tend to have women involved. Yeah, there's specific needs that are limited to folks that should be involved, as well as the Clergy Project and others. But the UU, Sunday Assembly, Oasis, minority groups, state church separation groups, secular activism groups. We've got all of those here, and if you're interested in more on that, be sure to take a copy of the flyer that we have on the Orlando Coalition of Reason. That's an extremely loosely affiliated bunch of groups, and if this is the first time you found out about a group, take that with you and see what else is going on out there. So before we roll into questions in just a few minutes, I want to talk about the Patreon project. So tell us about that. Tell us, you've moved out of professional life in IT, IS, and now you are a professional atheist, officially. So tell us how that's going. Tell us about the Patreon project and any other projects you want to plug.
Yeah, so I already mentioned the new video thing I'm working on. I'm also writing a book called If I Were God, which I can't tell you too much about, except that it's a whole bunch of questions and some discussion that I hope is accessible to everybody. Starting with things like, if I were God, what would I be like, to get the God definition, and why would I create anything at all? If I was going to create, what kind of creation, how would I interact with it, all of the questions down that line. The Patreon thing started, I lost my software job, and people kept saying, oh, you should just do atheism full time, and I was like, do you know how much that pays? Because there's only a handful of paid positions, and they're generally, head of an organization or something. And we'll see how the book sales go when I finally get done with the book as to whether that book's are a thing. But everybody's familiar with Kickstarter, I'm assuming. Give me a bunch of money and I'll do something. Well, Patreon is, I'm going to do something, and if you like it, you can give me a bunch of money. And so what I started doing was I set up the Patreon project. It's patreon.com/atheistdebates, and I do 3 or 4 videos a month that takes a topic, whether it's a particular theistic argument, a review, or a detailed deconstruction of a debate that I've done, bad arguments from atheists, how to think about logical fallacies, and I'll do somewhere between a 20 and 40-minute video to get into it in detail, because the short answers just aren't enough. As much as I wish I could just do a 2-minute video and be done with it, I can't even say my name in 2 minutes, as you're all well aware. So if people come along and they say, yep, I'll give you, $1 a video. And all of the content, by the way, is available to everybody for free. So I didn't just come here to come to my Patreon and give me money, which you can do if you want to. But I didn't, the big thing is I want to get content out to everybody. So it just goes up on YouTube. It's also available for free to Patreon, or on Patreon, to everybody. The only exception, there's a handful of special videos that are for patrons only. Right now there's only one, and it has no content that most people would care about. Last August, I went out to shoot a video at one of the Texas state parks. I prefer to shoot there when I can. And I hiked a mile and some change into this beautiful hidden waterfall. And I hadn't eaten, and I'm diabetic, and it was 103, and there was no cell service, and I had about that much left in my water bottle when I got down to the waterfall. And I shot the whole video. It was argument from design, coverage of that, and got some good background footage. And I went to hike out. And I got about 20 feet. And I went, phew, I'm kind of woozy. So I went out in 10-foot increments. No shade, no trees. It's the worst part of Texas. Austin is not like this, by the way. I went outside of Austin. And I started getting worried, so I grabbed my cell phone. I was going to call for help, no signal. So I set the camera up and I pointed it, and there's a video of me basically with incredibly slurred speech, obviously dazed and about to pass out, that basically explains how stupid I was I've got this much water left and I can't see anything, and I just, if you could just, if you find this footage, please post it because it's very important and I worked hard on it. And Beth, I love you, and not once did I think of praying. As if I have any say in it, nobody will get to claim a deathbed conversion for me.
Yeah.
And so as I was there about to pass out from heat exhaustion, it was very important that I record the fact that I did not reach out to deities and supernatural intervention. Luckily, I found some shade, and I sat on a rock where literally no cell service here and one bar here. And I called the park rangers, and they came out and brought me some water and took me back to my car. And they didn't scold me once. They were awesome. They wouldn't even take money. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. Let me at least pay you for the water. Nope, it's free. Well, if it's free, then why when I checked in here did you not just give me free water instead of making me pay for it? I had to buy the 2 bottles of water that I carried out there, but now they'll bring you free if you run out.
So you talked about your book. I can't wait to see what that's like. And I
Me
look forward
too.
To it. You don't know
It's
yet.
going so slowly because last year I traveled a ton, and I'm grateful for all that. This year I'm traveling a bit less, so I'm getting a little more work done. It was supposed to have been done this month, then it was supposed to be done before the recent rally. Now I'm hoping to have it out by Christmas. We'll see. Maybe if I come back next year, I might have it. Who knows?
We'll definitely have you back, and hopefully you'll have a book to sell. Before we finish up, I want to let everyone know that, Johnson, if you want to go ahead and head up the line here, we're going to line up on this side, right down the right aisle, facing the stage. We'll line up there if you've got questions. This isn't a break, but it won't be a disruption if you need to get up and use the restroom while we're lining up. And while folks are lining up, if you want to tell people how to connect with you, we did put Twitter and Patreon on the handout, so make sure that you grab a handout if you didn't already on the way out. Tell us how people can connect with you, and then we'll do some audience questions.
Oh, well, if the Twitter and the Patreon thing are on there, that's probably fine. I'm also on Facebook, but I can't add you as a friend. So they have like a limit, which I hit years ago. By the way, everybody who's familiar with Seth Andrews, the Thinking Atheist? Yes. Evidently, the page is back up. So the Thinking Atheist page and Seth's personal page and Sarah Moorhead's personal page and J.T. Eberhard's personal page all got removed from Facebook yesterday. But evidently, the Thinking Atheist page is back, and I think the rest of them are starting to get back. It seems that there are some people who just do these little let's get together and flag a page, either for fun or because we disagree with it, and Facebook's automatic flagging processes shut people down.
Yeah.
So if my Facebook page vanishes, blame Seth, and hopefully it'll be back up in a day or so.
Guilt by association. So we'll get questions here in just a second. If you want, I don't know if you wanted to do it.
No.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that way. That works. There you go.
Talk a shame.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for coming out.
Hi.
Could you please share your thoughts on street epistemology?
So street epistemology is the name that Pete Boghossian gave in his book on Manual for Creating Atheists. My friend Anthony Magnabosco in San Antonio makes use of the techniques. Anthony's a lot more laid back than Pete is, and Anthony's had a lot of success with it. So honestly, I couldn't actually describe all of the aspects of what he's advocating. We agree on a few things, a lot of things. We probably disagree on a couple things. I don't think there's any particular method that could be described rigidly that is the best method. I think it depends on the person you're talking to. And so while I'm perfectly happy for anybody who's had success with Pete's book and the methods used, actually Anthony Magnabosco is coming on the Atheist Experience sometime in the next couple of months to talk about street epistemology, and we'll have a conversation there which will probably get more detailed. But I think probably the best thing is to know your audience, and what might work and appeal to one person isn't going to necessarily appeal to somebody else. And are there kids in here?
Couple.
Okay. So sometimes people stop believing something because they explore and find out on their own that they're wrong. In other cases, they might be teased, ridiculed, and that prompts them to investigate or prompts them to give it up. I'm not opposed to ridicule, provided it's ridicule of ideas and not, but you have to be very careful because those two things aren't always easy for people to tell apart. When we're talking about core values that people hold and the things that define who they are, you could anything mocking of that, they're going to take personally. Hell, they're probably just going to take it personally when you disagree with them. But the methods that Pete advocates, I think by and large we're in agreement. There's probably some subtleties where we disagree just because I've been doing this on the TV show for a dozen years, and I have thousands of emails from people, and I meet people everywhere I go whose minds have been changed because of what's happened on the show or in the debates. So I kind of got my own feel for what works and what doesn't, and I didn't, not slighting Pete at all, but I didn't need a book. I mean, the book came along long after I had already been doing this. So if people find that it's successful, cool. But I'm kind of doing my own thing. Some people would say my thing is a version of street epistemology anyway. It's just that I'm on TV and not on the street. Although I did get in an argument with a couple street preachers in Australia, but that's another story.
One brief thing I could also follow up. Sometimes they're saying, is faith a valid way of knowing?
Yeah.
And I would ask, is faith even a way of knowing? Is that couching it correctly, or
For me,
your idea of epistemology and such?
yeah, for me, faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have a good reason. It's not a way of knowing. It is the default placeholder for a way of knowing. But there's no demonstration that, and I did a whole video on faith, actually, that's also on the Patreon thing, that specifically points out, please name anything, any position that couldn't be justified by appealing to faith. Whites are better than blacks, I'll take it on faith. Blacks are better than whites, I'll take it on faith. There's nothing that you can't just say, I take this on faith. Well, good for you. Why should the rest of us give a rat's ass what you take on faith? I want evidence, I want good arguments, and I'm not talking about robotic stuff, because we're emotional beings. You want to make an emotional plea? That's fine. But take it on faith? You might as well tell me you flipped a coin. I'd have more respect for the coin flip. Especially with like one of them double-headed coins.
Probably have.
Yeah, not with me, but...
Hi, my name is Teresa. I've been a lifelong atheist, and I'd say the last 10 years I've been feeling very disenfranchised because of the way religion pretty much has the rule over everybody else.
Mm.
I'm wondering, I've been noticing a lot of things like I read today about the Church of Lucifer starting up in Texas. They were opening, and there was a lot of pushback from that. And I'm wondering, are these people also atheists that are disenfranchised and just finding a way to get a tax-free society going under a different name and just being human?
So, Teresa was asking if basically the Church of Lucifer is just a bunch of atheists looking for a tax break. Maybe. I hadn't heard about this. I know that I've talked with a number of people involved with different, satanic temple and other stuff. And in many cases, they're doing great stuff that others can't do, which is, oh, you want to put your religious propaganda in schools? We're religion, and we've got some propaganda we'd like to put in schools, and boy, do people freak out, which is great. And it's legitimate. Most of the Satanists I know are in fact atheists, whether or not they adopt tenets of LaVeyan Satanism or some other variety. But I hadn't heard about the Church of Lucifer or whatever, which would go over great in Texas. So I can't really say. Some of them could be, but I tend to find most of them are actually, they're trying to expose religious privilege by making use of it. And I'm all in favor of that, because I think that it can wake people up a little more quickly. It's going to be far more effective than it'll be quicker than trying to reason somebody into saying, hey, when you're in favor of prayer at church, at schools, maybe it's not your religion's prayer that's going to be offered. Oh, well, that'll never happen. Well, I'm actually working on some promotional videos that do exactly that to expose this problem, and I'm using maybe actual Satanists, but at least the Church of Satan as an example in it. So I can't tell you what their actual motivations are. I just can't stand. I agree with Satanists on a good chunk of the principles that they have. It's a wee bit too selfish, too much about the self for me personally, but the tenets are generally far more moral than I find in a lot of other religions. But I just can't get past the name. It's, for me, there's a lot of value in that name for the type of things they're doing, but for me the name is just, it puts too much baggage into. So they're not about necessarily having conversation, they're about action. And I'm more about having conversation, and we need both. Thanks.
Hi, Matt.
Hi.
My name's Stephen, and I'm a big fan of all of your videos, so I appreciate the chance to ask you a question. I want to talk about the religiosity of this country and how much you think it's tied to the fact it's a relatively new country socially.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm from Europe, so I contrast it with Europe and the trends there. And in 100 years, what are we going to see? How will things be different?
Yeah, so let's contrast our baby country and its religiosity with that of Europe. There's this really cool idea, which I think may have some merit to it, that if your country has a state religion, that kills off all the other religions. And if you're like the United States and you don't have a state religion, that creates a free market where religions can compete and thrive. I think that's at least partially true. I also think that as a young, spoiled, rich, powerful country, it's not surprising that we often do things that you would expect from a young, spoiled, rich, powerful individual. And we don't have the history. We haven't, as a nation, necessarily learned from mistakes tied to religion, because we had what I think is a good idea, separation of religion and government. We have a free exercise of religion. And I'm a huge supporter of the First Amendment. I will never try to legislate anybody's religious beliefs away. Even the people, there are people who are like, oh, ban Islam. Nope. You'll never get me to support a ban on any religion. Specific practices, yep. Anything that's specifically harming somebody else, anything that's a violation of federal law, like the Indian religions that basically were lobbying to be able to use hallucinogenic mushrooms and things. First of all, I have no problem with them doing that, but I don't think that they should be allowed to do it as a special exemption from the law. They should just change the law about the drugs. But that's their choice. I don't know why we had. Well, the thing is, we also are very bad at looking at things in long spans of time. And really, if you go back before the 50s and the reaction to the godless communists, religion, you go back and read Colonel Ingersoll of the late 19th century, the great agnostic. He's speaking at the Republican National Convention. He's debating ministers in the papers. He's drawing massive crowds. And then there was this time where religion isn't as big a deal, and the elite said, well, we understand, but let's let the peons keep their religion, it'll go away. It didn't go away. It backlashed. So my rallying call is, don't ever get complacent again. Don't ever assume, religion's going away. So what does it look like in 100 years? I don't know. I pretend to read minds and predict the future on stage sometimes. I couldn't tell you what it's going to be like in 50 years or 20 years. All I can tell you is that I didn't want to be a professional atheist for fear of, if it doesn't work out, how do I go back to software after a gap? What's my career? My resume goes software, godless heathen. but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a job for the rest of my life because I don't think religion and irrationality are going away before I'm dead. Unless the transhumanists are right and we hit that singularity and then I can live forever. But I think I've already missed that window. But
Thank you.
sure, thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming out. My name is Ben, and I wanted to ask a little bit, some of your counter-apologetics videos on like the problem of divine hiddenness versus the problem of evil.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think they're two great, devastating arguments, but I was interested that you thought that divine hiddenness was a stronger tactic, and maybe there were a few satisfactory seeming apologetic rebuttals to it. And I mean, you know, to me, there's so many that why not call out some of the theodicies with the problem of evil and expose some of the problems? Is that just less effective in your experience because people have these rationalizations that are like a go-to to excuse God, you know, for...
Yep. So Ben asked, basically, there's the problem of evil, which is an objection to religiosity, saying if there is a benevolent God, why is there so much evil in the world? And that's very common and it's used a lot. I'm not a fan of it. There's also the problem of divine hiddenness, which is if there's a God who wants a relationship with me, why is there no good evidence for this? Why do I have to learn a dozen dead languages? Why do I have to take it on faith? Why is it this obvious to everybody that this particular God exists? And I much prefer that argument. And the reason for that isn't just because there are fewer good responses, I think, to the problem of divine hiddenness. There's a fundamental difference there. Problem of evil, you could at any time say, you don't even have to have an omniscient God that knows everything. You could have a God who understands reality so much better than us that he's able to see that the evil that exists in the world is necessary to ultimately get to a good. Just like, you know, you have to make mistakes before you learn how to do it right. That there is some great good that we can't see and can't comprehend. I don't think that's the case, and I'm not convinced by it, and I'm happy for people to use the problem of evil as an objection. Can't do the same for the problem of divine hiddenness. Because I don't have a perfect understanding of morality and good and evil, and I don't know what the end goal would be and how to get there. But I absolutely know what it's like to be in a relationship with me. And so if there's a God that wants a relationship with me, there is no counter to the fact that I don't have a relationship with God means either that God doesn't exist or doesn't want me to know it exists yet. And under both of those, it's not my problem. Thanks, Ben. Hi.
I have kind of like two
You should have got the Satanist question.
I actually wanted to comment on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Leve is somebody who wrote a lot that really meant a lot to me. And what you were just talking about, divine hiddenness, actually, I think is a big part of why we identify with the self as the ultimate, you know, moral judge.
And I'm in agreement with that. But so I don't think there's any such thing as true altruism in the way a lot of people look at it.
Exactly.
I think, yeah, I'm decent to other people because I care about other people, but I also care about other people because I have to share space with them. There is some benefit to this. And the things that appear to be true altruism, I think the world's more complicated, so complicated that you couldn't ever identify it as true altruism. So I'm all about self first. My objection is that, for example, in extreme libertarian wings and in some versions of Satanism, it gets to the point of near hedonism, like I got mine, screw you if you don't get yours, and I can't do that.
Right. Well, no, the tolerance is practical.
Yeah.
Really, to say the least.
But you had a question, and I completely interrupted.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Well, the thing about that, and it connects to my question, which is, I have someone, and there are a lot of people who see God as a universal constant. It is universal, occupies every space. And now they're are other people, and I think that these are the most religious people, who rationalize their ability to have this quote-unquote personal relationship with God as they have to give up the totality of it. They have to give up each unification with every space that exists, and therefore they can't actually have any recognition of self. So my beef with them really is that your religion is not a true religion. It's just how I want to rationalize the things that I'm in immediate control of, the things that immediately interact with me. I might call them spirits or devas or whatever, but they're not limitless and they're not all powerful. And my issue is, how do I communicate with a person like that God is supposed to mean ultimate authority?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was sitting here going, man, I'm not quite sure I understand this, and not quite sure where he's going, and then you got there. So
that's the easiest thing to disprove, simply exactly because of that, the divine hiddenness thing that you're talking about, that we have a self.
So at the end of the day, there's a guy who called in a couple weeks ago who said his parents are his God. And so we had this conversation on the show. I understand that you want to label it that way. I don't see any justification for doing that, and I think all you're doing is kind of muddying up the term. The whole point of having labels to communicate, labels are shorthand. Words don't have intrinsic meaning. We use the labels as a shorthand to a concept, and as long as your understanding of the label and mine are the same, we can then communicate, or at least similar.
Right.
So as soon as somebody does, well, God is everywhere and in everything, and even he's in the nothing in between the things that, okay. Tell me, what are the characteristics of your God? And how do you know that those are the characteristics? Generally speaking, I could say, this microphone is God.
Right.
And somebody out there would go, I know what he means.
Right, exactly.
And somebody else would go, wow, dude, that's deep. And other people would be going, oh, you're just being stupid with the label. So the only answer to your question that I can think of is you actually have to have the conversation. You have to talk about what it is that they're actually saying, and get away from the label as soon as it's an encumbrance. If you have one concept of God and you're trying to say the thing that you're claiming is God shouldn't count as a God, now you're being prescriptivist about language.
Right.
And so instead, just say, okay, I don't understand why that gets labeled as a God, so let's either set that label aside and just say Jeff's God or Joe's God.
Right.
And then work from there out.
Well, and they are polytheists, and I think that polytheism is really the only place that allows for the concept of sin, really, or the concept of mistakes, if you want to have a spiritual belief system, because that's not monotheism. Monotheism doesn't allow for mistakes.
You mean mistakes within the deities?
Mistakes within anything, if it's all powerful.
So assuming Christianity is monotheism, then it definitely has a context of sin. I'm just not convinced that Christianity is technically monotheism, no matter what they say.
Oh, well, yeah, I see that just in there being a
But the concept of sin isn't tied to polytheism.
Well, okay, yeah. Well, no, I just see it as, but anyway. My second question, though, was...
Well, your second question, let me be the dick that a lot of people want me to be.
Okay, cool.
There's only like 4 people, so if you just run back to the line right now, I can get to these. Yeah, thanks. Chase, you owe me a beer.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Little backstory. So I asked you a question in free flow, and I'll fill in for everyone. I'm a free thought leader. I asked a question about...
See, he not only went to the back of the line, he came to a whole nother event to ask to follow up.
I asked you, I'm a free thought leader. I asked a question on how to run a free thought group, and I thought you gave an excellent answer, and that's kind of the philosophy that we've come through recently. I'm looking for some specifics. We've done a lot of hard-learned lessons in our group. How do you herd 30 cats, the free thinkers, in a meeting and have some people who are really shy be involved in a big group of people over some people who are like going to jump in on every conversation? And it's a hard social game to play. And I feel like we've earned a lot of mistakes, and we've learned a lot of lessons. And I want to share that with as many people as possible. I just don't know how. And I'm sure there are other free thinker groups out there who've got great ideas for, hey, have this kind of event. People love it, or at least try it out. And I had asked you, hey, is there some place some forum where I can go do a write-up on all the good, bad ideas and the really bad ideas that you had for other people to read, and you said, I'm working on it. So, in public, in front of everyone, instead of just asking an email, I figured I'd call you out in about 6 months. How's that going?
You owe me 2 beers. So, the project ended up getting shut. The original idea that I had started years ago, because we had the Atheist Community of Boston, was to build an umbrella organization that was Atheist Communities of America. And it didn't have any governing authority. It was basically just an online network where the leaders of all of these secular communities come and talk about what went right, what went wrong. Hey, we did this event and nobody showed up. Well, we did that event and everybody showed up. Or we had this speaker who none of you have ever heard about who was amazing and you should really have, that type of thing. I just don't have time to actually I haven't even got my own website up for Atheist Debates yet. So I'm just using the Patreon thing. And there were a number of other organizations that were working on something similar. And it hasn't happened. And then there are a number of national organizations that have suggested that they might be doing something along those lines. CFI tried to build individual communities for a while. There are affiliates. You can be affiliated with these other organizations. What we really need is someone who knows what they're doing, who could probably knock it out in an afternoon. Just create a forum and give it a hand. And it's just, because I'm not running the ACA anymore, and because I'm focused on the book and Atheist Debates and all these other things, I didn't get to building that. So I apologize for telling you I was working on something that fell through. But you could do it. Yes.
The Coalition of Reason has a kind of closed Facebook group where organizers do share some of this information, and it's not as in-depth as what we're talking about, but there is a thread that I can add you to.
So CORE was what stopped me in the first place. I had this idea just before CORE came into existence. And when Coalition of Reason was initially pitched to our group, I thought it was going to be that, so I set this aside. And then their organization really, the website stuff didn't do that. It didn't create this network for talking. It just, here's Coalition of Reason Austin and the links to the organizations. So it was just pretty much flat websites without a lot of content. So while I'm happy for the publicity that CORE brought to those organizations, they didn't do the networking part. If they're doing it on their Facebook page, then that's a good start. And if not, not only could you do it or somebody else do it, you could also contact Hem and Meta and write a blog post about how you think that this is something that the community needs, and you've heard this from other people or whatever else, and see if you can find some volunteers in other organizations to work together on setting it up. I hate to completely bow out of it, but if I keep going on the 50 projects that I have working, then I know my book will never get done. And right now I'm only mostly sure that it'll never get done. But
Matt, let me answer that real quick. Sure. There's a pretty poor resource, Chase, and I say poor in its functionality, not in its interest. But there's the Free Thought Group Organizers on Facebook, which I think is perhaps even an open group, but it's definitely accessible. It's called Free Thought Group Organizers. That never took off into where I think Matt wanted to go with this. The Coalition of Reason is a resource. Something that we're talking about doing is bringing the Free Thought leaders in Florida together later this year. So let's make sure that you and I talk about that. We get them all together under one roof for an entire day. They can drive in the morning, drive out the next day, stay overnight locally, and we'll get a powwow of the Free Thought leaders together in Florida in this calendar year. So let's talk about doing that.
And there's one other idea that is not mine, although I try to share it whenever I can. If there's ever a state secular gathering, I think, because somebody gave me this idea, you need to print out a map of the state, just put it out in tape on the floor of the auditorium. And at some point, have everybody go stand where they're at in the state. And that'll let people know, holy crap, you're right next to me, or you're way down there. And it'll help give a visual aspect to the potential relationships that are just in the state. I want the national organizations to do the same thing. I was really hoping that something like this could happen at the Reason Rally. I won't be there, and I don't know if they have this planned. I think that would be the absolute best time to do it, because when it turns out there's nobody there from Montana, we can deal with that.
That's a great
Is your
idea.
name really Thor?
No, he wanted to be Apollo, so.
Okay.
Mine's Mikey. I love your debate videos. In fact, I was a fan of the Atheist show, but the debate videos made me actually learn how to pronounce your name.
Oh.
I am in a situation where I was with my mother.
You were with my mother? Holy crap, this took a weird turn. Tell me more.
Okay, when I have to deal with people that are theists, or it gets into that debate, there's the time where you're with your mother, you really want to be gentle, and then you're the one with the person that you just have to put down or whatever. Well, I'm in the situation where I have to be loving to these people, but also hold my own for my beliefs. They'll say things like, well, you have to pray for God's will, and that's the answer. And my thing is, well, what are you actually doing when you pray for God's will? You are just thinking of what good would do, and then you're doing that. We both have the same goal, but we show it differently, and a lot of times I'm on the defensive for that. But what you said about the kid, bringing the kids to the table and they both did, that kicked ass as far as a example of kind of slapping them with logic in the back door. Is there any kind of method of thinking that I should study about that? Trying to present logical arguments without actually presenting them as logical arguments.
I don't know. So, I highly recommend trying to make analogies that take it out of the context of what you're talking about, which is how we get to the kids misbehaving, which isn't actually so much an analogy as just a kind of a diversion, because we're still talking about morality. The problem is that when you start arguing from analogy, no analogy is perfect. There's a reason they're analogies and not digitales, which, okay, that didn't get as much of a laugh as I thought. They are not identical. And so while you can make an argument that's analogous that will be convincing to most people who would accept reason, there are other people who are so desperate to defend their view that the only thing they're going to look at is what's the difference between what this person is saying in the analogy and my thing. And then you have to have a conversation about what counts as special pleading. You know, why do you accept your religion and disregard these others? It's not, I can't give you a school of thought or a ready-made toolbox. Dan Dennett has a book that's all about tools for thinking, and there are a lot of good information there. The name escapes me right now. Somebody knows it.
Intuition pumps.
Intuition pumps.
You look Google that.
That's a good one. Shermer's written about why people believe weird things. There's some good stuff in there. There's the baloney detector. These things kind of help figure out what's wrong with arguments and different ways to think about it. I don't know that there's any kind of instruction guide on how. Get books on lateral thinking puzzles and just do the crap out of them, and if you can't figure it out, go read it, because it'll teach you how to do it. And when you've trained your brain that way, what you'll find, which can be very annoying, is that every time you hear an argument from somebody, while you're listening to what they say, your brain is also pulling an end around how many different ways can I look at this. What I do, I argue with myself a lot out loud. Now, I don't do it in public. There's a reason for that. Things have a different feel to them when they're verbalized than when you're just thinking it in your head. So I was terrified of public speaking, which is why I didn't become a preacher. And now I'm not bothered by it at all. And the reason for that is, number one, I learned if you're not trying to bullshit anybody, if you're just telling them what you think and you're being yourself, well, there's nothing to be nervous about. And the other thing is, I talked a lot. Now, I don't have any rehearsed answer. David offered to give me the questions ahead of time, and I said I don't want to know the questions because I want them to be off the cuff, because I want to see people, I want to think. I want people to see that I'm actually thinking and giving a damn about, let's consider this and come up with an answer. But almost every topic we've mentioned tonight, I've spoken about dozens, if not hundreds of times. And I know how certain things sound. Debates, in a big public debate, it's not about who has the best arguments necessarily, even though ideally it probably should be. There's an element of theater involved in debates. There's a reason why certain speeches are considered to be great oratory, why someone is a much better politician. There's mannerisms in different preachers' cadences. Jerry DeWitt is a really good friend of mine, the first person to publicly become non-anonymous from the Clergy Project. And we were talking about this because he's a Pentecostal. He was a Pentecostal, and it's Pentecostal, according to him. I thought it was Pentecostal because I was a Baptist. But we started talking about how the different preachers that we knew spoke differently. There's different cadences. And you can tell sometimes just from a recording what denomination you're listening to. You listen to a lot of Catholics, and you get the more sing-song type of stuff as we're doing the Mass type thing. When you get towards the more fire and brimstone, these things evoke different responses from different people. It's not an accident that religions have used specific methods of speech, and it's also not a conspiracy to hypnotize you, so don't go way off the deep end. These things, they used what worked for the product that they were selling. It's the same tactics of salespeople. The people who are real go-getters, it's selling things. There's a personality component, there's an ability to connect with the audience, and there's the specific patterns of speech. And by the way, neurolinguistic programming is pretty much crap too. But there's some little truth in there because we respond to things. There's a reason we like music. Your question had nothing to do with this. But it did. Because thinking about things like that and how you're going to present this allows you to sometimes remove yourself from the content to consider how you're going to frame your response and how you're going to deliver it, and it lets you look at the content from a different angle sometimes. I live in my head, whether I'm doing the Atheist Experience show, whether I'm doing a debate, even when I'm doing a magic show. I am constantly, my entire life is, I'm thinking about something, I'm arguing with myself about something, even if I'm playing a video game. I have to be thinking about something. And I can't teach all of that, but I can teach parts of it, which is why I'm doing the Atheist Debates Patreon project, which you can all support at blah, blah, blah. And I don't have a better answer, Thor, so I vamped a bit.
Good stuff.
Hi there.
Hi. I thought it was Hammer. I was like, Thor, Hammer, you guys are sitting together.
You were primed.
So I'm going to continue the theme of talking to your mom about God.
Okay. You want her number, or do you already have it?
So when I talked to my mom, you mentioned one specific logical fallacy by name, the true Scotsman, right? That's the only one you mentioned by name so far, I think. And that's the one that is my mom's favorite. So while we're watching the TV, the news or something, like, oh, those aren't real Christians, those Westboro people. So, and so I'll be like, Mom, how do you define a real Christian? She'll be like, well, it's not that.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, well, I consider that to be Christian. Then the conversation's over. Good game. You know what I mean? So when those are the only two sides of the argument, I believe it's this way. I don't believe it's that way. Talking about your definitions issue.
Yeah.
How do you get around that?
Well, first of all, you always, in order to get anywhere, you have to have somebody who's willing to have an open conversation about something. And if their only response is, then sometimes you just have to stop. Now, if you really want to have the conversation and they don't want to, tough. They don't want to. So the goal then becomes trying to make them realize that they actually do want to have the conversation. And with Christians, it's particularly easy because they want you to not be going to hell. Generally speaking, they have a commission to share the good news. And so instead of talking about what is or isn't a true Christian, and for most people you're going to get an answer like your mom's of, well, it's not that. I mean, but when you've got the Pope coming out to say that Donald Trump isn't a true Christian, I mean, if the Pope's going to commit the fallacy, so is everybody else. Is the Pope Catholic? What's a true Catholic? I don't know. And so this is what I was saying about if the labels get in the way, fine. But if somebody doesn't want to have a conversation, and if they're just talk about something else. And eventually, if they really care about this, if your suspicion is that they want to have the conversation but they're not equipped for it, wait. And this is why I point out to people, I get a lot of email from kids saying, my mom and dad want me to go to church, and I'm an atheist, should I come out? How should I come out? How do I have a conversation with them? And I'm always telling them the same thing. Go to church, take lots of notes, ask lots of questions. They might not make you go anymore. And you'll be equipped to have these conversations. Because, by the way, once you grow up and get out of mom and dad's house, unfortunately, you're probably not done dealing with religion. It's pervasive. And for me, with my folks, is as far as making other conversations easier, this won't apply to everybody, but I went to my mom and dad after we couldn't get anywhere, and I said, you believe that God exists. You believe that God has a plan. You believe that God wants me to know He exists. And you believe that He listens to your prayers. You can give me your personal testimony every day forever, and it's never going to change my mind. Why don't you just pray that God reveals Himself to me? Because you know me, and you know that if God reveals Himself to me, I will not deny it. I may not worship Him, because He's a moral thug, but I will not deny it. And as soon as I said that, it took all the responsibility off of them, put it back on their God, fictional or not, where it belongs, and we were able to have other conversations, because instead of wailing about how they'd failed me as spiritual leaders, about how I was destined for hell, about how I was working for Satan and leading people to hell, which is, I got a birthday card that said, we are praying for God to stop you no matter what the cost. But my parents love me. And they know I'm a good person. They're the ones who are in this terrible state of conflict, not me. And people say, well, are you mad at your parents? No. And I'm not mad at my pastors either, that they are as much a victim of religious indoctrination and brain scrubbing as I was. And while I don't like to lightly toss around the term pity, I do pity them. Their mind has been corrupted to the point where even what they identify as love is unrecognizable to me. My wife's family would talk about love, and we love you, and we're waiting for you to come back to Jesus. You don't know what love is. Your love is more conditional than anything else I've ever met. I have to believe the same thing you believe, or else you can't quite love me the way you'd really like to, is what they're saying. But as soon as I gave them the tools and the permission to put it back on God's shoulders, and that takes it off theirs, and then we can go back to, talking about the weather or planting trees or whatever the hell we're going to talk about.
So we are out of time, but we're going to do two more to make sure everybody that had that question first off gets that question asked. So just two more.
And I will give shorter answers.
No, you're fine.
Hi, Ralph. What's your question?
My opinion has changed on whether people like you should debate theists, because some of them are virtually insane, and they don't really debate, they just have talking points, like you said, or they give emotional or social arguments. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think about that? About the value of debating insane people, basically?
Okay, what's the value of debating insane people? I don't know which way, you said your mind had changed on this, I don't know which way it had changed.
Against debating.
Okay, then we're in violent disagreement on every single portion. First of all, religious people aren't insane, and they're not stupid, and it's not a mental illness. I get it, but functionally in the argument, they're presenting things that are completely not rational, and in many cases, they're not able or willing to see reason. The value is in exposing that. When I'm up against Cy Ten Bergenkate, who is about as much of a brick wall as you're going to run up against, I was overjoyed to be able to expose that's a brick wall. You keep saying this, but you don't provide any evidence, you don't provide any argument. If they present an argument, you can respond to the argument. If it's a horrible argument, you point out that the argument's horrible. And the purpose of the debate is for all the people that are watching, because there's somebody out there who kind of agrees with Cy, or who kind of agrees with Ray, but they can't, and when those people up on stage say the exact same thing that they would say, we have mirror neurons. So like if somebody hits their hand with a hammer, the same pain neurons fire in your brain when you see it as fire in theirs. The only difference is you also have another set that acts as a blocker so you don't feel the pain, which is why when you see somebody get kicked in the nads, you go, there's a flinch there. The same thing happens in an argument. When you see somebody who holds your position and offers up your argument embarrassed, when their position is soundly defeated, you feel that embarrassment. And that's, I think, the value in it is for the people out there that are watching it. But,
Can I just say one,
sure.
But I got all of that in hearing you summarize the argument in about 10 seconds. I didn't have to listen to him with his
But yes, you got it in 10 seconds. I guarantee you there were people who didn't get it even after watching the debate twice, which is why I had to do 3 videos of debate reviews, thoroughly explaining the fallacies and pointing out the problems. And then more people got it, and there are still some other people out there who won't get it. And here's the thing. I can talk to you and say something, and if it's the first time you've heard it or we don't have a relationship, it just... Now somebody else says the exact same thing to him in the same way. It's completely different because they've heard it before. So now, hey, I've heard this again. It's kind of a curiosity. And then somebody else comes along and says it in a slightly different way and doesn't really change his mind, but now he's viewed it from a different perspective. And then a fourth person comes along, says word for word with the same tone that I used, if that was possible, and now his mind's changed. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it takes repetition, and sometimes it may just be, he might think I'm an asshole and not care about what I say, and the person who comes along who speaks a little bit more compassionately gets through. And it could be the case that that person who was compassionate was viewed as weak and didn't get through, and when I come through extra assertive, all of a sudden that works. That's why we need many different people using many different approaches to reach as many people as possible.
Isn't that how religion started in the first place?
Well, yeah, that's how religion started in the first place, a big, long guess. But.
Hi, my name is Jerry.
Hey, Jerry.
I was curious, you didn't really expand on that moment in time when you were riding with your friend that you had that epiphany, and you mentioned it in that you thought you might be agnostic, and I wanted to ask you the question. If you could expand on that just a little bit, and I'm wondering whether or not that epiphany came like Paul's epiphany on the road to Damascus, or whether or not this was something that kind of came out of your rebellion against organized religion.
So the questions for people who couldn't hear it, I didn't expand on the conversation I had with my roommate when I told him I might be kind of agnostic, and he wanted to know if I thought whether that was an epiphany like Paul's epiphany on the road to Damascus, or whether it came out of a long period of rebellion against religion. So it was not an epiphany at all. I spent about 18 months after I lost my job at Dell. I thought God was punishing me. I had not been a particularly good Christian for a number of years. I hadn't been active in church in several years, which, by the way, was used against me in a video the other day to say that I wasn't actually a true Christian, because I'm willing to acknowledge that despite being in church for many, many years, there was a period of time where it wasn't that important to me. So I spent about 18 months in pretty serious prayer and study, talked to minister friends with the goal of becoming a preacher, and there was no epiphany, there was no single moment. A lot of what happened was I would find arguments against Christianity or something, some objection to something in the Bible, And I'd already read the Bible several times, completely, as a kid, as a teenager, and during this process. And I would say, well, that's not in there, and I was wrong. Or I'd say, that's in the Bible, but it's not like that, they're missing the context. All the things that we hear from theists all the time, you're taking it out of context. So I had to go read and study and go through the context. Anyway, this entire period, about 18 months or so between, okay, God's punishing me, I'm going to be a preacher, to I'm as devout as ever, and now I need to find ways to convince my atheist roommate, to holy crap, I can't believe I was so wrong for so long. The drive home thing, I had been coming to grips with what kind of label I was going to put on this for a long time. And there was no period of real rebellion. There was a period where I didn't care that much, and then a period where I started caring as much or more than ever. And my only goal was to fulfill my obligation under 1 Peter 3:15, which instructs everybody to be ready, be prepared at all times to give the reason for the faith that you have, and to do so with gentleness and kindness, or I forget the actual adjectives that are in there. I wanted to be able to give a good reason for what I believed. And I was convinced that the God I believed in was absolutely real, and that being able to give a good reason for it should be easy and obvious. The people who call in and say, look at the trees, I understood what they meant, and I agreed with them. Look at the trees, of course. Well, how can you not look at the trees and realize that this whole place was created by God? You can't make that tree. Scientists can't make that tree. They can, kind of. But they can't make it from nothing. This goal of being the best Christian I could be, turns out the best Christian you can be is an atheist. Because I'm a better person, morally, ethically. I have better views. I don't have to love the sinner, hate the sin. I can say sin is a bullshit concept because there's no way I can offend a God, and any God that's overly concerned about who's sleeping with who when they're consenting adults is already a little creepy. And I can love the sinner and the sin, because I don't think that there's anything necessarily, this thing that you're labeling as sin is just attacking who we are as human beings. You want to talk about real sins? You want to talk about committing atrocities? You want to talk about slaughtering people wholesale, enslaving people, all the things that the Bible actually advocates? That, if I were to buy into any concept of sin, it would be that. And my go-to statement that I've said so many times is, if there is a God, and he reveals himself to me right now, if he's not a humanist, fuck him. I don't want anything to do with him. But I would treat him humanely.
Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate you being here this weekend. I know you'll stick around for a little while longer. About 6:45, we've got it.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.